Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the ReinventED Legal Business, the Case Study series. Absolutely delighted today to welcome our guest, Catherine O'Connell. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
Hi, Terry.
Catherine is a New Zealand lawyer working in Japan, and we thought it was, really a great opportunity to chat with Catherine about what that's like. What it's like to be a foreign lawyer working somewhere else. It is a new and different, expanding, perhaps evolving area of legal business, and so fitted really well within the context of this series. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine in just 1 second. And again, a welcome to all, Catherine, particularly a welcome to you. I'm going to hand over to you for your prezzo, and then I'll jump back in with some questions either from the audience, from me, or from others. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Terry. Prezzo, that's such an Australian expression I haven't heard for a little while. So, I am here in Tokyo, the city of the Olympics, right now, middle of summer. It's a little cooler today, 28 degrees, and I know other parts of the world are in winter and also other climates. So I thank you all for taking time today during what is a lunchtime hour in Australia and in Japan. So let's get started. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I often refer to myself as a lawpreneur, a legal entrepreneur, as I think Terry uses that one. I'm a lawyer and an entrepreneur, so of course I call myself a lawpreneur, and that's getting quite well used now in Japan, as I'm using it a lot. I was a finalist in 2 law awards last year in 2020. So during a pandemic, that was really super for me to be nominated for 2 awards, Foreign Lawyer of the Year and Boutique Law Firm of the Year. Also, I did actually win an award. I was Entrepreneur of the Year 2020 in the British Chamber. The British Chamber had a business awards, and I won the Entrepreneur of the Year, and that was just fantastic in November, and another couple of awards. So while some lawyers and others fell into the wallpaper, I really tried to make 2020 a very outside, being out there, external kind of year, and I did get rewarded in that way. And as Terry said, I am the first foreign female to open a practice up in Tokyo. There was one lawyer before me who was a female who opened up in Okinawa a number of years ago. But in Tokyo, I'm actually the first female who's a foreigner to start a law firm here. I broke away from my corporate role, which was an in-house legal counsel, heading up a legal department in 2017, and I launched my boutique law firm in 2018. That took a little while because I was registering in both New Zealand and in Japan to get the regulatory approvals. So that's where that sort of gap between 17 and 18 is. It took around 10 months to do all the paperwork and get myself launched. And that's a story in itself. And so law is where I am now, but before I became a lawyer, I had a first career in tourism back in New Zealand. When I left school, I went and did Japanese for a couple of years and became a proficient Japanese speaker. So I was actually a tour guide working in New Zealand, taking Japanese tours around New Zealand, bungee jumping and jet boating and landing on glaciers as my day job. And I gave that up and came to be a lawyer. So really, that was 26 years ago. I don't feel that old, but perhaps I am. It's now 26 years ago since I joined this business of law, the game of law. And most recently in this year, I launched a podcast called Lawyer on Air Podcast. And I'm really happy if you would jump over and sign up and subscribe to that. If you're interested in law and beyond that in leadership, you really will quite enjoy it. I'm at the 10th episode now in season 1, talking with Japanese and with foreign lawyers who are based in Japan or have a nexus to Japan. And it's really very, very much fun for me and a great add-on to my business and great for social media and content. So this is a really big CV, lots of detail in there, but when I'm sending out information to people to tell them what I do, I have it all summarized now on a 1-pager. This is the profile I use. And my foundation in my CV is really based solidly on in-house counsel legal experience and my network that I've built up over this 26 years. So before I was where I am now, you can see the rundown on my work history. I was head of legal at a company called Molex. Molex are the inventors of the lightning connector for the iPhone. That's one of their most famous products, and I worked on that deal when I was with them. I was also with Hogan Lovells in Tokyo and in London. They seconded me off to Mitsubishi Motors, where I had a fun 2 years as a secondee in their business. Before that, I worked with Panasonic, 4 years in Osaka, working with them. And my very first job in Japan when I left New Zealand was to work with Olympus Corporation on a 1-year contract. Prior to that, in New Zealand, I was at Anderson Lloyd, and I think there's a couple of New Zealand lawyers on today too, so you'll be familiar with that firm. I am registered in both Japan and New Zealand now, but I'm also registered in the UK because I sat the England and Wales bar as well. So I'll leave it there for the moment and get into another couple of slides only. So this is not a big boring presentation, just to show you a little bit about my business structure, how I'm doing things a bit differently here and what I'm doing the same. So my business structure is very much a solo practitioner running a boutique law firm. Boutique in that I am providing flexible legal services to corporates and businesses in Japan. And I call this sticking to my knitting. And this is a very traditional way of expressing things, but I quite like it. It's sort of just making sure that I stick to what I know and love very, very well. And that is commercial work, corporate work, regulatory and compliance, but done differently through this flexible legal service model that I have. And I launched in April 2018, as I said. So I'm now in my 4th year of practice here in Japan. And I am registered as a foreign entity in Japan. And what that means is that when you're a foreigner in Japan, you register as what is called, in long words, Gai Kokuho Jimu Bengoshi, or Gaiben for short, which is a foreign registered lawyer. In Japan, there are roughly 37,000 lawyers in total. Of them, 400 are registered foreign lawyers. So I'm one of those registered foreign lawyers. You need to be a registered foreign lawyer to open up your practice in Japan. If you're an in-house lawyer in Japan, you do not need to be a registered foreign lawyer. So this is a qualification that you need to have to be opening your own practice. And so I'm one of those. But in terms of sole practitioners in Japan, to be honest, there's really only around 20 of us. Only 20 of us who are running our own practice. And I'm talking about people who are purely sole, like myself, the only person principal. Other businesses that have 2 or 3 partners are not called sole practitioners, so they wouldn't form into that 20. But that's where we're at. So it's quite a rare thing when you go down into the subsets there. So what do? I look after clients in Japan, but also beyond Japan. As a bilingual foreign lawyer here, I service B2B clients, business to business, and also B2C clients. B2B is quite common for me. I'm working in a lot of B2B sort of situations. Clients are often Japanese subsidiaries of overseas companies. So I'll show you a list on the next slide of the companies that I work with or I'm affiliated with. So I have a lot of overseas companies. Overseas means Australia, New Zealand, America, Europe, who have businesses in Japan, but they don't have a legal entity here. Legal, I mean by, I should say legal department here. They have an entity here, but they don't have a legal department within the entity. Or perhaps they do have a legal department, but they don't have enough lawyers and they're really, really busy and they need some extra help. So I help people in that way. Then there's the other side of the coin, which is Japanese companies who are doing business with New Zealand and Australia and the US, and they need help in order to communicate and deal with the local laws and lawyers and other businesses in those countries. So I also help that section of the community as well. And as I say, this flexible business model is helping businesses on a part-time or project basis. This is really not common in Japan. In fact, I can say that I launched this as a sort of pioneer business in Japan. It's just not done. People either work in full-time in-house legal roles, or they run a law practice, or they're in a law practice working as a private practice lawyer. People like me who do part-time law, I'm a full-time lawyer, but part-time for different companies, doesn't really happen. So I'm still, even after 3 years, the pioneer and leading person in this area. And I do hope that others will come along with me very soon and start doing this kind of work, because it really is very rewarding. I'm not only flexible in the way that I deal with my outside clients, but internally, I try to walk the talk with this flexible model by the people I employ in the business. So I have several part-time contractors who are all working for other businesses as well as mine. So they are mothers of who have children. They're people who run their own businesses as consultants or as administrative staff, or who have their own law practice, in fact. So I hire those people in on contract to work with me. So I am having this business model that is flexible both inside and outside. It truly is what I would call flexible. And as I mentioned there earlier, my flexible legal services, I provide them to people in Japan and outside of Japan. But within the companies that I work with, so for example, big corporates who might have an APAC-based GC, a general counsel. So currently I have an APAC general counsel who's based in Australia. I have another one in Singapore, another person who is based in London, and another person who's actually based in Switzerland. And all of them have the need to have somebody look after the local stuff in Japanese, get things going, take their mind off having to be worried about the Japanese operations, and I help them out in that way. So that's a big portion of the clients I look after. As I mentioned, Japanese subsidiaries, but they have no legal department here. That's quite common. One of my big anchor clients is a very large Japanese corporate. You will see on the next slide their logo appearing. They need extra work. They're so busy. And because I have familiarity with that client, I used to work for them, and you'll figure out who that is. They need some extra overflow help here and there. So I help them because I'm extremely familiar with the inside of their business, and they hire me back in on a part-time basis for compliance and other legal work for them. And then I have another round of clients who are SMEs and people who are not exactly startups, but are post-startup. So they've been in business a couple of years, but they forgot to get their legal ducks lined up. And so I help them go back and make sure they've got a good suite of contracts and templates. And they often hire me as their general counsel, external general counsel, like I like to call it their lawyer in their pocket, and they have me and ring up and ask me to help them out on retainer. And then, to be honest, I have also the sort of LOD and Axiom kind of contacts as my collaborators, because they don't have a presence in Japan. So they often reach out to me to help their clients. So here's an array of clients. You can see here, these are an array of clients that I directly work with, and also through my collaborators such as LOD or Axiom or other clients ask me to work with them. Zespri, for example, is directly working with me right now. If you haven't already guessed it, Panasonic is indeed the big client that I have as my anchor client that I do a lot of work for. Molson Coors are a direct client. They bring in beer and other manufactured products, liquid drink products back into Japan. All of these businesses I work with. Zozo is a Japanese company that has extensive operations in New Zealand, so I help them. Jetstar were a big client of mine, introduced to me by LOD, and I worked with them up until this pandemic made their business very, very difficult in Japan. So that gives you a range, a look at the kinds of big clients that I do actually work with and really enjoy working with across the board. So the last slide I have here is really just what I'm doing that's already still traditional to what I did before when I worked in law firms, and what I'm doing that's a little bit different. So traditionally, I still keep the hourly rate. Not only the hourly rate, but I also do something different with it as well. But I do stick to the hourly rate because For Japanese clients who are based here, they really do like the hourly rate as a way of getting their internal approvals so that they can get approvals for the business, from the management, upper management to hire me. They often need to know what the hourly rate is, especially if there's work that's perhaps capped and then they need hourly rate after that, they need to know what that is. So I still do work with an hourly rate model. As I mentioned before, I stick to my knitting. I keep to my commercial business areas that I really like working in. I don't go outside of that. I work with people who have those expertise in other areas, employment law, family law, IP. I don't do that work, and Japan is very much divided up so that we can't do that kind of work. And I can talk a little bit more about that later with Terry. I'm also true bilingual and bicultural, which is not as common here as you'd think. People do speak Japanese, but not as fluently perhaps as I do. And that's not to be boasting, it's just a fact. I wouldn't be able to probably open this business and operate it very well if I didn't have the level of Japanese spoken and written that I have. My hours, traditionally, they are long for lawyers, and I still have long hours. Last night, I finished a podcast with a friend in the USA, and I didn't finish that till midnight, and then I was back on this morning. It's not always like that. I am more attuned to looking after myself and health and wellness. Wealth is also important, but health and wellness are really important to me, but I choose that. And so I get to choose when I do these hours. No one made me do the podcast till midnight last night. That was up to me. And so again, traditional should be about what your client wants and needs, and that has not changed in my business. But what's different is, I mentioned the pricing model before. I do actually vary my pricing model depending on the client. And so for these flexible secondments that I do with clients, I do have fixed fees, I have capped fees, half day and daily rates, and of course a monthly retainer. So as you can see, I've got a hybrid mix of people who would like the hourly rate. I stick to that. Nouveau, what I do differently is having a lot of fixed and capped rates. And to be honest, in Japan, with a lot of the Japanese law firms here, it's not always the case that you can cap your fees, but I really like to do that to give certainty to my clients. SOPs, standard operating procedures. I have a bunch of those for administration, for billing, for networking, for marketing. I created these standard operating procedures for my law firm. And to be honest, again, a lot of law firms in Japan, I'm not sure how it is these days in Australia and New Zealand and other countries, but often law firms do not have a manual you can go to find out how you do things. I created that so that people who work with me know how to do the invoicing, collecting of the payments. They know how to be marketing on behalf of the firm when they're out and about. All of this in a very well documented portfolio, and I have those. So I'm really proud of those. I'm also very much into social media. If you go onto LinkedIn, you'll find me there quite healthily. I'm always out there and use social media very much as part of my marketing. I also invest in self-investment, which is masterminds and an executive coach. I've worked with an executive coach since 2016, and I would not be without someone like that. A lot of lawyers do not hire executive coaches, and so that's probably a little bit different and new here. And on any given day with my secondment clients, I literally have 4 laptops that don't belong to me, belong to other clients, 4 security badges, 4 ID cards. So that's for when I'm going into these clients' offices to work alongside the business people or the legal people. And so that's probably a little different, that I have all these gadgets as well as my own 4 or 5 technology. So I have to be very organized to make sure I take the right laptop to the right client's office. And again, another thing that's quite unique about me, a little bit different, is I do have this in-house counsel lens that I apply to all of the way that I do my legal business. And there's not very many at all who are in-house counsel, truly in-house counsel experienced people who are operating a law firm or are practicing as a private practice lawyer here. The other thing I do that is different is operate a corporate mentorship service where I provide CEOs with legal and risk essentials. Often when they're here, they don't know the risk they have as the CEO or the leader of a business, and I help them out with that. I also have an Associates Accelerator Academy, which allows associates and other in-house legal staff to communicate very, very well in English. And I run a mastermind, which is on an invited or referred basis for lawyers who join that to have coaching and interaction with other lawyers. So why am I doing all of this? It seems like a whole lot of work, you might be thinking, but the inspiration for this model came when I was in my last corporate role. I was the head of legal, and I had one other staff member working with me. She left to go and do another job, and I was left by myself to do everything. And at that time, I thought, goodness me, wouldn't it be great if I could have somebody come along and help me on a part-time basis, on a project basis, come in just the mornings to help me out with all of the legal work. But that person wasn't there. Necessity being the mother of invention, I decided that the seed was really sown at that time to do the business of being a flexible lawyer for other people, become that person, become that change I wanted to see. And that's why I set up a business like this, where I can be that part-time person for lawyers like the person I was before, who needed someone to come in and help me out part-time. And I have that necessity as the mother of invention, taxis in Japan. Well, taxis in Japan had this innovation where people would come up to the door to get into the taxi, but they had their hands full of bags shopping. And so taxis in Japan invented a system where the door opens automatically. And so that is an innovation that I tried to apply here, opening the door to other clients who can then get access to legal services on a flexible part-time basis. I really just saw no role model doing it here. So I got brave, put out this vision for myself and gave it a go. And I'm trying to leave breadcrumbs along the way so that others will follow me. So this is what I'm doing. Traditional law firms, traditional businesses here do not provide this flexible service. So it really is something that I'm doing to help with fluctuating needs for clients. And let's face it, not every business can hire a full-time lawyer. So I am that change that I wanted to see, and I want to help, and I am helping businesses who need a lawyer. And in order to do that, I went out and surveyed the network. I talked with in-house counsel in my network and asked them what they needed. And they said they often needed somebody who could come in and work when they went on holiday. And so I filled the gap in that way, and I'm really proud of that. So we're going to head into some Q&A, I know, with Terry, but I just wanted to leave you again, just as we finish up, my details here, Lawyer on Air, to remind you of my podcast name. And if you hold your iPhone camera up to that QR code, you can get all of my details in one go there. So I'll leave it at that for a few moments, Terry, while we go to you, and then I'll close down the PowerPoint.
Sure, thank you. And folks, just wanted to remind you again of that Q&A button at the end of your screen there. So if you've got some questions for Catherine, please feel free to put them into the Q&A as well, and we'll be certain to address them. Thanks, Catherine, for that. It was a great presentation and really interesting to understand, I guess, how you decided to do what you do and to get where you are in terms of all of this. I wanted to, if I can, just ask you a few questions about the business kind of set up in a way, just so
Sure.
that folks can maybe understand that if they've not worked as a foreign lawyer before themselves. I want to come back to the process of kind of what's kind of involved in that, and I appreciate it. It differs from country to country. But in terms of the law that you are practicing, you're practicing New Zealand law and not practicing Japanese law. And I was wondering if you could, maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
That's correct. So under the regulations here, if you've registered foreign lawyers cannot practice Japanese law. We are entitled to, we are approved to practice our own jurisdiction. In my case, it's New Zealand and UK English law. So the way it's regulated here very, very heavily, but also collaboratively. So we are encouraged to be collaborating very much with Japanese lawyers for the Japanese law advice. or if clients want to set up companies, for example, that we need to collaborate with a different kind of lawyer or employment law. So they also need our help for things and we need their help. So I can still run a practice based on the fact that I'm advising in foreign law. And for anything that steps outside of that, I'm usually heavily collaborating with Japanese lawyers. So that's a really important, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it's a very important distinction to make. I cannot go out there and advise on Japanese law. I can provide advice on my business experience over these nearly 20 years in Japan, what it sounds like, what it looks like, what I think would be the situation, but it needs to be always verified and clarified by a Japanese lawyer.
Yeah, and if any Japanese law advice was being given, it would be given by Japanese firms, signed off obviously by those firms.
Sure. So anything that I'm using, for example, templates that are subject to Japanese law, contracts, they've all been verified and given the okay by my Japanese lawyer colleagues. And so I can provide those to clients, but it's always with, this is a Japanese law aspect, it's been approved by a Japanese lawyer. Or if I'm receiving a contract from someone that's subject to Japanese law, it's not my template, it will certainly go off to a Japanese lawyer to get a view and then come back to me, and then I can provide it. We've got to be very careful about these things.
But as you say, it's good that that's approached as a collaborative opportunity more so than something, if you like, to find where you're messing up to prosecute.
Yeah, and I think exactly. Some people get a little annoyed that they have to just be registered into this certain box, but the whole point, it's very much reflecting Japanese society in that we are meant to be very collaborative amongst the society, right? Japanese work in teams rather than an individual. So this entirely reflects itself within the legal system to be collaborating, and it really does expand your network. So you find all kinds of lawyers who will help you in every situation. So I have a network of people who I just send clients to because it's not my area of work and I can help them, and I've built that over time because of this situation. So it's viewing it from a different sort of positivity as well, that we're collaborative. Absolutely. Excellent.
We've got a question there, and I want to sneak in one other question that's kind of going to lead to that, actually, and not asking you to go through in detail the process to become a registered foreign lawyer, but there is a process. And would you generally classify it as complex and difficult to follow, or is it one that is, once you've got all the information and I'm assuming you can get it, it's something that you can follow through relatively easily?
It's a little mixture of both. It's more in the latter. Once you understand the process, you can follow through, but it's not always that easy. So in fact, for myself, I wanted to do it right. So I hired a Japanese lawyer to help me with the applications,
right? Because
they have to be in Japanese, and I didn't want to make a mistake in those applications. So I hired a similar to me sole practitioner to help me do that. And that was lots of fun. I met another person along the way who helps me now for other things. So it takes a long time. It's a paper-based application. It's nothing to do with sitting an exam to register in Japan. They verify basically what you've done before, where you worked, where you worked at, what experience you have, that you meet what was 3 years, it's now down to 2, I believe, and 1 year I think you can have in Japan. So it just took a lot of time to gather all of the reference letters, the verification that I worked at Anderson Lloyd. That's a long time ago that I did that, finding the partner that supervised me. So there was a lot of intricacy involved in getting that together. But really it's crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And the big thing you need is patience.
Yeah.
It takes a long time, and they will come back and say, oh, you said this, did you mean this? And so you're back and forth on little things like that, because someone's got a checklist and they're checking you off on that. Sure. But once you pass that and you show that you are a collaborative member, that you'll be working with across the community, that you're trustworthy, that you fit the employment experience requirements, that you can show your degree and your current qualification, usually you're through. But it did take a long time. And I'll just add there too, I was also qualifying under New Zealand Law Society to launch their brand here, basically, and be regulated by the New Zealand Law Society. And it's the first time for the Law Society to have somebody here as a sole practitioner in Japan. So that was another level. And therefore it took most of 2017 2017, very American way of speaking that I have now, 2017 to qualify.
Yeah, brilliant. I want to pick up the question that's here, because it does, as said, kind of flow from this. And I'm just going to go and read it for you. For anyone else considering your path of starting a solo firm in Japan, what are the biggest myths you can help debunk? For example, things you were told, or perhaps you worried about, that you found to be untrue.
I think the one thing was that, isn't it risky going out by yourself? That's not true, because I'm not really by myself. I have a whole network of people that I've built up over 26 years, of people who will come to me as clients, who will refer me, and who I can collaborate with. So a myth is that you're by yourself. I'm certainly not by myself. So I'd say that would be one. Another myth would be you need to already have all your systems set up, and you need to have clients lining up at the door, and you need to have money. I think I would debunk that myth, because yes, you need a certain amount of money. You would not go out without any money, right? It's like building a house. You would not live in the house without the walls, the foundation, perhaps a bed to sleep on, a functioning kitchen. But that's about all you need. And so if you have that enough structure, nobody needs to know that you don't have a glamorous couch to sit on to watch the Olympics on a big TV. That's all later. So as long as you have the basics to get going, and you have some structure in place with your admin support, I think you can get going. So that's another thing I would say is not always true, and I thought it might be true. And number 3 would be, clients won't pay you. How do you get your clients to pay you? And they'll want to pay 1 or 2 or 3 months later after you've invoiced them. Not true. And I received some really great advice from the New Zealand Law Society to say, you're a small operator, you can have your business terms set at 15 days for your payments. And so I just did that. I didn't say, may I? Is it okay if? Just went straight through and did that. And so I get paid within 15 days for all of that. So I'm not out of pocket supporting big businesses because they have big cycles. I'm ahead of the game and getting paid sooner. So I'd say those are 3 key areas, at least for one.
And really, Catherine, as I'm listening to you, it's good advice no matter where you were located in terms of what you've just shared. Is it, you mentioned, obviously being bilingual, so language capability of the country that you're in, and I appreciate in this case we're speaking about Japan in particular.
Yeah.
So staying with Japan, is it permissible, I guess, is one question, much less is it possible for you to do what you do if you were not bilingual? So if you were, for example, English speaking only.
I think it would be difficult in many ways, because having cultural fluency as well as the linguistic fluency really does make you more accepted as somebody who's got a real intention to stay in Japan and be a contributor to society and to people. So it's not impossible to not have that language, but I'm trying to think of someone who doesn't have that and operates a business here. If you're in a large practice, a large law firm, yes, you always usually have some support. Your admin either understands or speaks Japanese, or has that capability, or somebody in the firm is around, an interpreter, for example. But for a smaller business like me, I would say if I didn't have this, I probably wouldn't have thought about launching.
Yeah.
I'd be advising on New Zealand law, but in order to communicate and understand the nuances with the clients that I'm working with, especially Japanese clients, how would I do that? Yeah. And if I also want the expertise of a great employment lawyer or an IP lawyer, I'm often speaking to them in their language. And I wouldn't get that expertise from them perhaps if they didn't have the English. They've got the knowledge, but if I can't speak to them in their language, I may not get the same level of advice.
Yeah.
So to me, it's really critical for the fluency in language, but also in culture.
Yeah.
I would say it's not impossible. So I'd challenge someone to do that, but I think it would be a whole lot harder.
I wanted to pick up on the fluency point, and obviously, this is critically important, as you say, to your business, but in an increasingly borderless world, it's a question that really has gone global. So I wanted to, if I can, just ask you a little bit more about that. what do you mean by cultural fluency, and how important is it in your case? Obviously, someone living in Japan who came from New Zealand, but for folks that are doing business internationally, regardless, how important is this this cultural fluency that you referred to?
I think it's utterly important. It's primary. I mean, you might be able to speak Japanese very, very well, but if you don't have the cultural understanding, or perhaps if you're very, very good at Japanese and you have a kind of arrogance about the way you speak, you don't defer, you're not culturally sensitive, then no matter how good your Japanese is, it could be almost too good if you don't understand the cultural undertakings, right? And for example, Japanese are often very indirect. So they may just say something like, "Oh, Terry, that's difficult. That's difficult." And usually that's difficult means we cannot do it. It's just letting you down very gently, right? So that's one thing. And, just being very, very aware of things. For example, you're holding a meeting as a lawyer and you launch the agenda as you get online like we are now. And you haven't set the agenda in advance. I mean, this might be practical for everybody, but especially in Japan, sending materials, sending everything in advance so people have a chance to digest. And also even having pre-meetings with people that this is what I want you to speak about. And you're doing a lot more effort in order to make people feel very, very comfortable. The other thing would be in meetings, not calling somebody out individually, a question asked to the group. If you're going to call somebody out and put them on the spot, you would let them know well in advance so they can prepare themselves. So things like that, if we were just being very Western and we said, "Hey, Terry, what do you think?" and you're ready for that answer, as a Japanese person, you may not be. And so dealing with your clients or business people in that way, without that cultural sensitivity of how to approach a meeting, I think you can let yourself down no matter how brilliant a lawyer you are or how good your Japanese is.
Yeah, really, really important, I think, because we're all wanting to establish long-term relationships now, and being sensitive and mindful of things such as the ones that you've just highlighted, just so incredibly important. Catherine, I wanted to turn a little bit to kind of the advice section, in a way, if you like, of this series, and ask you some broader and then perhaps some narrower questions. But firstly, you referred to yourself as a lawpreneur. And as you say, we love the term legalpreneur, but we'll love lawpreneur as much as well.
Thank you.
On a particular occasion. And I'm just wondering, sometimes we see collected together all of the typical characteristics, or perhaps the way that lawyers approach their clients and business on one side, and then we see the entrepreneur characteristics on the other side. So I'm wondering, are you an anomaly, or do you think that it's possible for every lawyer to have a preneur attached to their title as well?
What a great question. I think if we start as intrapreneurs within the business and within law firms, that's where we can always be trying to do something different. And I didn't know that was possible when I was probably coming through my private practice years in New Zealand. I didn't know it was okay to suggest something or do something differently, or like suggest something. Let's just say that, suggest something to do it differently, a process to do differently. Because who do you question? Why would you question a partner and a senior associate when you're a junior solicitor? But knowing that that's actually okay now, and I've learned very recently through my podcast, a couple of guests have said that they put up their hand and they suggest, let's do hydrogen, let's do legal tech. Let's do a session that's purely instruction for women lawyers and how they can speak up for themselves. So these kinds of things would never have occurred to me. But now I think people are learning that they can do that. So I think it starts from that entrepreneurship. But really, if we think about the way that we do our work, isn't there a better way to be doing absolutely everything if we put our mind to it? We don't have time to do it. So I think I try now to carve out time to think about ways I can do things differently, innovate, use more of the skills that I don't have, and have other people help me do it. I still am delving into the legal tech kind of things. I haven't found, there's so much out there, but there's nothing that really helps me individually with things I really need to do. But what I'd say is, I think the preneur is within everybody. it's pulling it out and knowing that it's okay to do it and that you can do it without actually having to ask. And I thought I needed permission back in the day when I was in private practice in big firms, never ever bothered to question. But I think now, because I have my own practice, nobody's stopping me. I don't have to ask anyone. It's all on me and I can do what I want. So maybe, I don't know if I'm an anomaly. I think everybody can actually have the preneur.
I guess so. If you know, one of the things that came to mind as you were speaking then was, if our businesses have to be continuously improving, and if we need, you know, for them to be agile, and I think we do, then we've got to have that aspect available to ourselves. And we've got to keep challenging ourselves and looking for different ways to do things in our businesses and personally. So to me, there's a correlation between the two. Do you see that you're the driving force and the change agent in chief, if you like, of your own business?
I think that's right. I am the change agent, right? And also for clients that I'm working with, if they don't have a lawyer in Japan, I see myself as their chief legal officer. I don't just think of myself as a secondee, switch on, switch off. I think, how can I make their business different to help that general counsel, but also help the business get to know what legal is all about and what lawyers can do and how we can be different. Get them to think differently about what a lawyer might be, or different to, say, what they might see on a Netflix series, or what they might think of, if they're Japanese, what they know of as a bengoshi, a Japanese lawyer, what that traditionally looks like. So I think my challenge is to help people see the way that you can do law differently. And if it's helping lawyers, that's fine, but it's also helping business people see it in a different way as well.
Absolutely. Just wanted to wrap this session with a question that we often wrap this session with. If I'm a lawyer sitting in Australia now and I want to be you, I want to go to Japan, or any country for that matter, to set up business or to do law differently overseas, what's your advice for where I start? Where do I go now? I'm excited. In fact, this has made me very excited, this presentation about wanting to do that. Where do I go now? Where do I start?
Well, first up, you can always get in touch with me and we can talk. I'd be happy to speak with anybody who's got an interest in it, because the more people who come along this journey, the better. So I'd be happy to speak with people. The second thing is, don't wait. You know, a lot of people wait for the reason to do something and think, you know, as I said before, got to get for example, put it in a ship. You've got to get out on the ship and start sailing it. Don't be thinking about, oh, the ship might capsize, I'm really scared, or I might not reach my destination. But, you know, the future is not a destination. It's the direction to go in. So if you've got that feeling in your body that everyone's going north and you want to go south, just start. Think about, though, speaking with people who are already doing it, that you can see there, who might not be doing all of what you want to do, but there's usually quite a few practitioners who'll be doing bits and pieces of what you do. And that's what I did, is I talked to 5 or 6 sole practitioners in Japan. I had separate meetings with them, coffees, and we talked a lot about what they did, and they gave me advice on what was good and what was not good. So you always go to the people who are already a few steps ahead of you and ask them what they're doing. And second, you're never going to get it all perfect. You're not going to know all the answers before you start, but you start. And what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah,
it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Then what do? You go back to doing what you were doing before, you try another thing. But if you never, ever try and you go through your life without having tried, I think that's the worst failure you can have in yourself. So getting on with it and just starting. So I really want lawyers to challenge their fears, go with that excitement and get going. Speak with an accountant to make sure it's going to be quite a viable business, but you're never going to know 100% before you start. And lawyers love knowing 100%. You can't do that. So the other thing I would say is hire an executive coach. I did that in order to help with some of that must have it perfect side of my brain. And now I'm a bit more of a risk taker, and I never really thought I would be. But seeking help from external people who have done it, who are ahead of you on their journey, and who are people who are a little bit different to the business, like the coaching kind of person.
Yeah.
And giving it a go. You will sail the seas. You'll be able to dock at the port. You can always replenish your stocks when you're in port, and there is plenty of fish in the sea. If you only have one sort of portion of the pie, it's enough for you to keep going. So I would encourage anyone and welcome anybody who'd like to speak with me further.
Well, thank you for that. And I have to say, from my own experience as well, I've found folks to be incredibly generous in terms of their time and advice. And so, yeah, I mean, thank you.
So much so.
Thank you for happily joining that group, Catherine. Really appreciate it. And so for today, again, Catherine, thank you very much. And to everyone else, and to you too. Bye-bye. See you next time.
Thank you very much. Bye.